We are looking for work that yields results and are not opposed to any procedures, whether it's a meeting or otherwise. The important thing is to achieve positive outcomes that serve the interests of Syria and Turkey. This was President Assad of Syria. If the meeting were to lead to results, or if embracing, reproaching and kissing beards, as it is said in colloquial language, achieves the country's interests, I will do it. The meeting is not the issue. The problem lies in the content of the meeting. Israel's grinding and brutal war against Gaza, and now its assaults on Lebanon, have occupied many of the headlines and the headspaces of those in the region and beyond. Squeezing between the stories of horror and carnage have been stories of Syria and Turkey. The two nations have been tangled in a mess since the early parts of the Syrian civil war, fighting on opposite sides. But today, talk of conflict and regime change have been pushed aside in favour of talk of normalisation. This week, what does Syria and Turkey have to gain by normalising relations? What might they be willing to concede? And is one of the last blocks of regional isolation set to fall for President Assad? My name is Hugo Goodridge, and you're listening to The New Arab Voice. The story of the Syrian civil war is a long and tragic one. To précis the information, President Assad, with vital help from both Russia and Iran, survived in office. The war cost the lives of over 600,000 people and left the country shattered. It was a sort of Pyrrhic victory for Assad, who today only controls around 60% of Syria. The majority of the contested land is in the north, and important to understanding the relationship between Syria and Turkey. When we talk about northern Syria, we can split the region in three: the northwest, the north, and the northeast. The northwest region, by which we mean the city of Idlib and parts of its surrounding countryside, is controlled by a group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They are an Islamist organisation with links to Al-Qaeda and are in opposition and have fought against the Assad regime. In the north, the more traditional opposition, comprised mainly of the Syrian National Army. They are supported and funded by Turkey. Additionally, Turkish forces are also present in this area and on the border of the northwest area. They are there to generally maintain security and keep a watchful eye and, if necessary, forceful eye on the boundaries between the groups in the north. In the northeast, Kurdish groups. The largest and most significant Kurdish group is the Democratic Union Party, or PYD. The legislative body that oversees the Kurdish-controlled region is the Autonomous Administration, although much of the power of this body is centralised in the hands of the PYD. The Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, are the main military force. The primary component of these forces are the People's Protection Units, or YPG. Also present in the northeast and supporting Kurdish forces are forces from the US. There are greater complexities inside each of these territories, but these are the broad brushstrokes of the situation on the ground today. Normalisation efforts between the Assad regime in Damascus and the Turkish government in Ankara have their eyes firmly fixed on the situation in the north. Starting with Syria, what do they have to gain by normalising with Turkey?
Syria's normalization with Turkey would be definitely an important and significant process in the regional normalization of the Syrian regime.
This is Joseph Daher, a professor at Lausanne University in Switzerland and founder of the blog Syria Freedom Forever,
which has been ongoing for the past 2 years, mostly symbolized with the return of Syria to the League of Arab States and restoration of diplomatic ties with Saudi Arabia.
During the Syrian civil war, the regime, led by President Bashar al-Assad, committed brutal atrocities, some of the worst seen in modern times. These crimes prompted many nations, both regional and further afield, to cut ties with Damascus. In recent years, Syria has slowly been welcomed back into the fold. See past episodes for more details.
Syria's regime is too weak politically, economically, and militarily to regain northern territories, including the territories under the control of the Turkish army in the northwest, which has been under the control of Turkey for several years now. And Syria could not be able to regain these territories without the approval, without the coordination of Ankara.
As mentioned, after years of brutal conflict and, in essence, a victory, Assad only controls around 60% of the country. He would like to take control of the other 40%, but can't. He has neither the political nor popular support in those areas, nor the money, nor the military strength. If he is to take control, then the land will have to be given to him by those who hold it now, namely Turkey. This is true in the northwest and north. Normalisation with Turkey would be in Assad's interest if it meant he could take back control of those areas. It is also true in the northeast, although this land is not held by Turkey, and here the interests of Syria and Turkey dovetail.
Right now, the YPG-PYD presence is the main national security threat for Turkey.
This is Pinar Dost, a non-resident fellow of the Atlantic Council's Turkey programme.
Turkey wants to dismantle the Kurdish autonomous administration led by the YPG-dominated SDF and prevent the formation of a federal government in northern Syria.
Turkey has had a long-running and frequently violent battle with Kurdish groups, in particular the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. The PKK has been designated as a terrorist organisation by Turkey, the United States, the European Union, and a host of other countries. Turkey views their fight with Kurdish groups in Syria's northeast to be intrinsically tied to their wider fight with the PKK.
Since last autumn, it has increased its operations against PKK-YPG in Iraq and Syria, targeting not only the fighters, but also their infrastructure, like oil fields and ammunition storages. So the SDF definitely wouldn't want to see a partnership between Damascus and Ankara, as that will threaten their existence and goals.
Eliminating the Kurdish threat is certainly a motivating factor in Turkey normalising with Syria. There is another motivating factor.
Another major reason for Turkey's efforts is to create the right political, economic, and security conditions for the safe, voluntary, and dignified return of refugees living in Turkey.
Today, Turkey hosts approximately 3.1 million Syrian refugees. That number has been higher, but it is still a massive number.
In the short term, normalization could also help improve humanitarian aid to opposition-held areas through border crossings with Turkey.
There is a third element, which is trade. Both Turkey and Syria are suffering acute economic problems, although the latter is far more severe. Normalising ties could open the door to far greater levels of trade. This trade would also be far easier, since it would not be crossing internal lines between opposing elements, which can be very costly in the form of either bribes or simply theft. There's a lot to go through. Much of this process starts with the withdrawal of Turkish forces from Syria.
The Syrian regime demands regarding continuous improvement of relations with Turkey, or improvement of the reconciliation path with Turkey, has been the same for the past few years, basically asking a withdrawal of Turkish army from the northwest.
Turkey's military presence is the strongest opposition to the regime in Damascus that still exists within its borders. And it makes sense that Syria would want foreign powers, who weren't specifically invited, to leave.
I believe this kind of condition is mostly rhetorical, as the Syrian regime is too weak to make demands on the Turkish regime, plus is unable to manage these territories without the assistance of the Turkish regime.
If you take control of an area, the general expectation is that you are then responsible for that area. You'd be expected to provide security, homes, services, and some basic living standards. The Assad regime is struggling to do that in the areas it currently controls. In 2023, the United Nations reported that about 90% of Syrians live in poverty. This year, the World Bank reported that 27% of Syrians, about 5.7 million individuals, live in extreme poverty. In April, the deputy governor of the Central Bank of Syria announced that the annual inflation rate in Syria reached 122%.
Turkey believes that the Syrian regime is unable to manage the northwestern territories because it's a population, also the local population, is seen and is wisely perceived, rightly so, by regime as being opposed to the Syrian regime, while in the northwest it is also unable to manage a future without what is currently the ruling authorities of the self-administration areas. So basically the regime's weakness and inability to guarantee the interests of the Turkish government is impacting any progresses regarding full restoration of ties between the two countries.
It's an odd situation. Syria wants full control over its territory, but if it did get what it wants, it would be unable to manage or control it. This has the potential to further weaken the position of leaders in Damascus. And to add to the oddness, the Assad regime would benefit if Turkish forces remained. And it's here where Syrian and Turkish interests align. The Kurdish areas in the northeast. In July, President Erdogan of Turkey addressed an audience in Istanbul. We are determined not to allow any structure that would pose a threat to our country on the Iraq and Syria line. Just looking at the type and variety of weapons seized is enough to reveal how Turkey is fighting a multinational and multi-partner terror consortium.
As you know, YPG is PKK's offshoot in Syria, and PKK is a recognized terrorist organization by the US, the EU, and Turkey, which was fighting the group for the last 40 years. So, getting Assad's support to attain this objective is important, but is not enough, obviously, to attain these goals. This is also in Assad's interest, as both Turkey and Syria consider the Kurdish fighters in Rojava as terrorists. Over the past 2 years, Turkey's approach to fighting terrorism beyond its borders has changed. Now Turkey is focused on eliminating threats at their source.
Both Assad and Erdogan view the Kurds in the northeast as terrorists and a problem to be dealt with. Earlier this year, blood pressures in Ankara rose when worrying reports came from the northeast.
In May, as you can remember, the autonomous administration aimed to hold municipal elections to establish an administrative organization and boost its legitimacy. But Ankara saw this as the precursor of an attempt to create a federal government led by the SDF, posing a threat to both Syria's and Turkey's territorial integrity. The election, as you remember, was postponed due to Turkey's threats of attacks, but also by the US requesting SDF to delay it by a lack of conditions for free, fair elections in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. Today, the YPG-led area in northeast Syria is a significant national security concern for Turkey.
The holding of elections as a means of increasing legitimacy was a red line for Turkey. The fear was that if the Kurdish population in Syria was able to legitimize its autonomy, then the Kurdish population in Turkey could start to make similar demands. There is a blueprint for an arrangement, which some have suggested could be a way forward. It's not a new blueprint. In fact, it's over 25 years old. It was called the Adana Agreement.
It was beneficial when Turkey signed it in 1998, because at that time there were fighting. Syria was supporting PKK. And thanks to the Adana Agreement, Syria ended its support to PKK, recognized PKK as a terrorist organization, and expelled its leader, Abdullah Öcalan, which paved the way afterwards for Turkey to arrest him and conduct cross-border operations against PKK terrorists.
Most recently, it has been Russia, President Assad's most valuable ally, that has been calling for a return of the agreement.
However, the Adana Agreement only allows Turkey to intervene within 5 kilometers of the border, and only for short operations. Turkey cannot remain there. So this is totally in alignment with Russia's goal of having Turkey withdraw completely from Syria. Turkey wants to see SDF pull back 30 kilometers from the Turkish-Syrian border and agrees with the Syrian regime forces to enter those areas. So I don't think the Adana Agreement is enough in today's context. Also, because there is no strong central government in Syria now, as you've been talking just recently, and the country is heavily influenced by Russia and Iran, who are the real players on the ground.
Perhaps not ideal. And the fact that Russia is pushing for it probably doesn't help with making it more palatable for Ankara. Another option for Turkey is to do the complete opposite of a withdrawal. Escalate. Push for a decisive blow against Kurdish forces, which could, in turn, open a space for the Assad regime to move in and take control.
It's not that easy because Turkey is not the only one to decide about it. So let's remember, Turkey had already 3 operations, military operations in North Syria, Operation Euphrates Shields in 2016 against ISIS and YPG. Then Operation Olive Branch in 2018 and Operation Peace Spring in 2019, all aiming to push back the YPG across its borders. It's true that Turkey has been planning to launch a new military operation in northern Syria for the last 2 years, but hasn't been able to convince the US, Russia, nor Iran, which all publicly opposed this operation. The previous operations were based on Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which recognizes the right of states to self-defense against threats to peace. Those earlier operations had the tacit approval of both Russia and the US, but that's not the case this time around.
While Turkey has military strength, it lacks political cover. And while the Assad regime has the political cover to attack and retake the northeast from Kurdish forces, it lacks the military strength.
In the northeast, I would add an additional challenge for the Syrian regime is obviously the presence of US foreign forces and the support it brings to the self-administration areas in the northeast. This has not prevented the Syrian regime, especially in the northwest, to continue its bombing, and in the northeast to basically support various groups, particular tribes, to try to create instability with the assistance of Iran in the northeast. So the balance is the following, basically. Despite Syrian regime rhetoric of wanting to have a return of its sovereignty on northern territories, it is unable to achieve it on its own. And this is why it needs to restore relations with Turkey in these particular areas, but with significant problems to guarantee Turkish interests.
Turkey does want to see some sort of progress in the northeast, but currently has limited options. It wants to remove what it views as a Kurdish threat, but there is also a concern that an Iranian presence could build up in the area, which Turkey does not want either. Turkey's interests in Syria are not confined to the Kurds alone. For years, it has been the main backer of the Syrian opposition, supporting political groups in the north of the country and providing military aid. A normalisation agreement between the Assad regime and Turkey would leave those groups in Syria who still vehemently oppose Assad in a dangerous position.
What will most probably happen is that Turkey will pressure these forces or to find a deal with the Syrian regime or to be demobilized directly by the Turkish army, as it is occurring with certain groups. And the main issue will be, will the Syrian regime accept to have deals such as what happened in southern territories of Daraa, like kind of reconciliation agreements with particular armed groups, will depend on the balance of forces, basically. We shouldn't forget that reconciliation agreements were put forward by Russian mediators, and it nearly, not completely failed. There are still some units which were Free Syrian Army that still exist, but with limited capacities and not in any capacities to challenge the regime. And these areas have witnessed high instability with assassinations. So I would argue that the destinies and the future of the SNA is very much in danger and threatened anytime the normalization process move forward.
Southern Syria provides us with an interesting insight about what could be expected. What is called a reconciliation deal would be struck, followed by, in some instances, brutal punishment by the Assad regime for past rebellious actions, which go against the terms of the deal. leading to an increase in anger and low-level but persistent assassinations and attacks by rebel groups, which the regime has little capacity to do much about. This is more or less how it played out in southern Syria. None of it is good for the opposition, nor the civilian population in those areas.
They worry that a rapprochement between Erdogan and Assad could come at their expense, especially since one of the Assad's preconditions for talks with Turkey was to stop Ankara's support for the opposition. Since the first ministerial high-level meeting between Turkey and Syria in 2022, let's think it was almost 2 years ago, each time there were statements from both sides or mediators, we've seen protests in the opposition-held cities against Turkey's engagement with the regime. But there were also other developments recently, such as crossing opening connecting regime-controlled areas in Aleppo city with opposition-controlled areas, seen as a concrete step toward normalization. So after the latest protest in the Euphrates Shield area, which is one of the Turkey's zone of influence, we saw Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan meeting Syrian opposition and reassuring him that Turkey wouldn't abandon them. Turkey will likely to try to mediate between the regime and the opposition if the normalization process continues, while asking for some concessions from Assad, possibly including some form of amnesty for certain groups or figures.
A deal is possible, but it would rely on the Damascus government respecting the deal after a Turkish withdrawal. And if it wasn't respected, Turkey might find itself with little recourse to protect those it once supported. The final sticking point in the potential normalisation between Turkey and Syria is the issue of refugees. As mentioned, Turkey is currently hosting over 3 million Syrian refugees. While aid agencies and international NGOs are very active on the ground in Turkey, providing support and services, it can't be denied that hosting so many people has put additional strain on the country. When the conflict began in Syria, Turkey allowed a vast number of people to flee the intense violence and brutality of the conflict, a kindness that shouldn't be forgotten. More recently, the refugee issue has become significantly more contentious in Turkish society and Turkish politics. Syrians have found themselves subject to violent attacks, abuse, and intimidation. Over the summer, several cities in Turkey saw anti-Syrian riots and mob violence, with businesses and properties being damaged and set ablaze.
The issue of repatriating Syrians has been a big political topic during both the local elections in 2019 and also this year, and to a lesser extent during the May 2023 presidential elections. Both the ruling party and the opposition promised to send refugees back, so that's why the issue was very much politicized.
The number of Syrians in Turkey has reduced in recent years, but we've also seen reports accusing Turkey of forcibly returning Syrians. This year, Human Rights Watch reported that since 2017, Turkish forces have arrested, detained and deported thousands of Syrian refugees. One Syrian who spoke to Human Rights Watch said, quote, "They made me sign a document written in Turkish, and I don't speak Turkish. They wouldn't translate it. They are obliging us to sign these documents to make it look like voluntary returns."
Already more than 600,000 refugees have already returned. So the number of registered Syrians fell down, but there have been reports arguing that some of these returns, as you said, were forced. But we don't have any official evidence to back that up. So while the government might choose not to extend the temporary protection status for these refugees, because this is something which is repeated every year legally, international law states that they can't force anyone to return, but only facilitate voluntary returns.
The situation for Syrians living in Turkey is becoming more precarious every day. If a normalisation agreement is reached, the pressure on those Syrians to return to Syria will likely increase, and with it, hostility in some areas of Turkey against refugees will also increase. It will leave these Syrians with a choice: remain in a hostile environment or return to a potentially much worse environment.
In the case of the normalization process moving forward between Ankara and Damascus, the forced return of vast amount of Syrian refugees from Turkey to Damascus will definitely be a threat on their lives. We've seen numerous reports of international humanitarian organizations showing and demonstrating how large number of Syrian refugees going back to Syria have been tortured or been threatened by torture, having to spend enormous amount of money to be spared, etc. I don't believe this would be much different with Syrian refugees coming back from Turkey. In addition to this, there would be this suspicion from Syrian regime authorities of anyone being in Turkey of having had opposition activities to the regime. So therefore increasing, threats of torture, threats on their lives even more, I would argue.
There are pressing issues for both Syria and Turkey, and both governments have their reasons to push for normalisation. But the tangled mess that lies at their feet is currently looking impenetrable. A mess of demands and counter-demands, inability and unwillingness.
Today, the Syrian regime is unable to manage its own territories. Syrians are lacking everything. So imagine trying to manage the northwest with additional refugees coming in and a population that is considered hostile to Damascus, which has seen numerous displacement of Syrians from inside of Syria leaving their own territories, which were previously on the opposition, armed opposition group, fleeing towards the northwest. So this is why I'm saying Turkey has strong interest to see things moving forward, but it knows it needs evolution that doesn't come directly from Damascus, but rather on the regional and international political scene in this perspective.
Will Syria and Turkey normalise? Today or tomorrow? No. But in the future? Most likely. The path for Assad's normalisation has been set over recent years, and Turkey will, more than likely, walk it. This will be politically beneficial for the two countries. But the same cannot be guaranteed for the people, perhaps in particular the people of Syria. Civilians living in Kurdish areas face utter uncertainty, and across Syria, people are still living under the thumb of a brutal dictator who has proven he will stop at nothing to achieve total control. This episode of The New Arab Voice was written and produced by me, Hugo Goodridge. Our theme music was by Omar El Phil. The New Arab Voice will be back with a new episode soon. Until then, you can find all our previous episodes on all major podcast platforms. You can subscribe to the show to get notified for when a new episode drops. You can also check out our Instagram page and Twitter account, both at TNA Podcasts, for additional content. And you can email us as well, podcast@newarab.com. That's podcast@newarab.com. And you can also rate and review, which helps us spread the word. Don't forget to follow The New Arab on Facebook, X and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis and opinion from the region.